O come, Emmanuel, and with your captive children dwell. Give comfort to all exiles here, and to the aching heart bid cheer. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come within as love to dwell.
For many years, I was a volunteer at the local library, and where we would organize a huge book sale. At the start, we just set out boxes of books, but then we got the idea of sorting books by genre and collecting stacks of the individual titles that seemed to come in by the dozens, from books like the Da Vinci Code, which we think every single person in Saratoga County bought and wanted to get rid of, to huge stacks of John Grisham and Tom Clancy thrillers. Our huge stacks were typically fiction, except for one book, What to Expect When You're Not When You're Expecting. This book is quite handy for first-time expectant mothers. It includes advice on the physical and emotional changes, tells you what is going on in the baby's development, nutritional advice, even sexuality, and advice for fathers-to-be. I don't know a woman in the last 15 years who wasn't given a copy when they announced their pregnancy, usually by a doting mother or best friend. But once you've been through it, they say you don't need the book anymore. So off to the library book sale it goes, onto the pile with dozens of other copies of What to Expect When You're Expecting, alongside the piles of Brown and Grisham and Clancy. But it is handy to know what to expect when you're expecting. Before this book, of course, information was passed down in the oral tradition from mother to daughter, and has been since the dawn of time. But what of women who don't have mothers to advise them, or people who are pregnant and in situations that prevent them from talking to someone like a mother? So imagine you are a woman named Elizabeth. Your husband, Zechariah, is a priest in Nazareth, and you live in the 1st century of the Common Era. By current standards, you're old, although you're probably only in your 30s. But you are not only old, you are barren, much to the distress of your husband, whose status relies on family. And one day, you discover that you are pregnant. And because there is little in the way of what we would call obstetrics, this conception seems like a miracle. But your mother has already died, and there's no one to talk to. There is no one to tell you what to expect. Now, imagine you're Mary, Elizabeth's cousin, whose pregnancy you celebrate. You declare Elizabeth to be blessed among women. And it is true, you're fairly young, a teenager, and you have recently been betrothed to a man named Joseph from this same village of Nazareth. You were brought up to follow the laws of the Torah, and your behavior, sexual and otherwise, is tightly regulated. Yet things don't go according to plan, and you find yourself pregnant. According to the laws, you should be stoned to death for having sex outside of marriage, whether it was consensual or not. You are fearful. You're nervous. You are certain there will be shame brought upon your family. And you have no one to turn to in your shame, no one to tell you what to expect. Now, of course, the religious leaders from your time, and certainly in the future, frame this conception too as a miracle. Elizabeth's son, who we know as John the Baptist, is called a prophet. Mary's son, who we know as Jesus of Nazareth, is called by some a prophet, some a teacher, some a Messiah. But when Elizabeth and Mary were pregnant, they had no idea who these children would be. In fact, it is only long after their deaths that we get these mythic narratives, the visitation of the angel Gabriel, the miraculous conceptions, the esteemed status of these two mothers. No, Elizabeth and Mary were simply waiting for their children to be born, hoping like every expectant mother that they would be healthy, safe, successful, and loved. Hoping like every expectant mother that their children would bring light and love into their lives and the lives of those around them. And at the core, that is what this season of Advent is about. It is a time of waiting. Waiting for the changes that come as new life grows. Waiting for something new to grow in us. Waiting simply for a new birth and a new light to shine, to bring love to all.
Spirit of love, come in, for there is much in our lives keeping you out. Our own concerns consume us and turn us inward. Grant us patience, give us the eyes of love, open us to the needs of others, fill us with the love of the season.
O come, you splendor very bright, as joy that never yields to might. O come and turn our hearts to peace, that greed and war at last shall cease. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come within, as truth to dwell.
One of Aesop's fables tells the story of a thirsty crow who spotted a pitcher of water but whose beak wasn't long enough to reach the water. So he starts dropping pebbles into the pitcher, and eventually the water begins to rise. That tale is often told to illustrate perseverance. But what if instead the water is our belief that, as Theodore Parker says, the moral arc of the universe is long but bends towards justice? And what if the pebbles, which look like boulders to us, are so small the water doesn't seem to rise? Even when these pebbles of shocking injustice are not dropping one by one, but by handfuls. We have a too long list of people of color killed by police with little justice. We have a too long list of immigrants and refugees in crisis at our borders. We have a too long and too unsettling list of mass shootings. We have a too long and too unsettling list of attacks and violence. We have a too long list of trans folk being murdered for being simply their true selves. We have a too long list of women who have been sexually harassed, abused, and assaulted. We have a too long list of people willing to justify harm in the name of their God. And now we have a too long and too unsettling list of people who have died because of COVID-19. A too long list of people who have been taken ill by the disease and still suffer with its effects. And an administration that is hidden, ignored, and refuses to address that too long list. And we are wondering, how many more pebbles can our pitcher take before justice begins to rise to the top? How do we make sense in the season of waiting, of the need to wait for the moral arc? Because we are waiting. We long for justice in our justice system and safety on our streets for everyone. We long for accountability and responsibility from the very people who demand our respect, sometimes violently. We long for a day when every single person would rise up and say, enough is enough, we must end this violence. Oh, how we wait. Waiting for the long moral arc of the universe can be discouraging and demoralizing. It can bring despair, paralysis, denial. Waiting can be exhausting. We cry out, how long, O Lord, how long? But wait we must. And during this Advent season, we are called to wait differently. As the Reverend Annie Gonzalez Milligan writes at the Blue Boat Home blog, we are called to active, hopeful waiting. She reminds us to wait like Mary, this pregnant teenager in an occupied territory who knows she is sacred. Gonzalez Milligan writes, if you too know oppression in our current society, remember how very sacred you are. Remember that you are co-creating divinity itself with your life. Let your soul magnify the divine, who would scatter the proud, bring down the mighty, and fill the hungry with good things. And she reminds us to wait like Joseph, who stands by his pregnant fiancée when his society tells him she is wrong, unrespectable, immoral, and when he himself is confused. We should think carefully about the judgments we make and hear. We must learn to value justice and righteous anger more than respectability and peace. We must push ourselves to dialogue with others and find a way to stand with those who are bringing love into the world, even if they are not doing it exactly the way we'd like. And in our waiting, we must listen and be open to the truth of other people's experience, the violence and condemnation, the fear and the struggle. We cannot walk in another person's shoes and know their entire experience, but we can practice radical empathy as best we know how. And so in this way, we wait. We aren't still. No, we keep moving forward. We actively wait for a new creation, a beloved community, a way of living into relationship that defies the systems that destroys lives in our country and our world. We actively wait for the true liberation that draws the circle of love ever wider. We wait in this time of Advent.
Spirit of truth, come in. For in our world and in ourselves, there is conflict. Too many lives form the battleground of the struggle for justice and power. Grant us patience as we keep moving forward, never turning back. Give us a common dream. Fill us with peace. Fill us with the truth of this season.
Oh, come you day spring, come and cheer our spirits by your presence here. And dawn in every broken soul as vision that can see the whole. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come within as light to dwell.
In the film Michael, there is a moment when the titular archangel, played by John Travolta, has an opportunity to brag a little about the influence he has had on humanity. I invented standing in line, he insists. Before that, everybody just gathered around. It was all a big mess, so I said, why don't we just make a line? And asked what the line was for, he replied, to get in. We humans are good at waiting. We wait for the bus, for the check to arrive, for the wound to heal, for the workday to end, for the call from a loved one, for a good diagnosis. And we wait to start things. as soon as I finish my degree, when I get a new job, as soon as I meet someone, after I lose weight, once we have a new building, when the death of my partner doesn't feel so sharp, as soon as this depression lifts, when the pandemic is over. But the pandemic has worn on so long, time seems meaningless right now. I look at my calendar and it tells me it's December, but wow, that doesn't seem right. Wasn't it just May? And wasn't that like a year ago? And what happened to August? The only way I really know it's December is that there are signs of the holiday season. The colored lights on the house down the street, the daily emails from stores imploring us to buy, and the advent calendars and candles that remind us of this time of waiting, this time of pausing. And while December is often a frenetic month full of shopping and baking and parties and pageants, there is always a sense that our pace was about to change. We look at the bare trees up here in the Northeast and touch the solid ground and notice a dearth of songbirds. And yet we know, too, that underneath the ground, living things are changing and growing. The writer of Ecclesiastes in the Old Testament reminds us that for everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what has been planted. It is true for the earth. This shift is true for us. And in a normal year, we would say, of course, we know this. It's as Christmas ends and this time and the winter into March that we celebrate these holidays. We travel, we take classes, we go to shows, we learn, we grow. But this has like a huge life pause. Almost here we are waiting things to again. And it's in a lot of work communities in our congregation because spring came and summer came and autumn and now ads come. And as the music hall in Hayward, suddenly nothing happened. And worse still, we don't know how to plan because we hold our breaths in fear of this third wave that's already sweeping through most of the nation. And we sit here, hope. We sit in this long, strange, growing colder pause, unsure, unanxious, and wondering if life will ever return to normal, wondering what normal might even look like. This feeling that we all share, a combination of listlessness, yearning, distraction, loneliness, boredom, tinged with grief and melancholy. We all feel it in different measure at different times. And thanks to an early 5th century monk named John Cassian, we know its name, acedia. The feeling of acedia isn't new and it isn't ours alone. We are all feeling this. In the 5th century, it was the effect of monastic life, separated from the flow of humanity with no end in sight. In the 21st, it is the effect of the pauses and lockdowns and quarantines, separated from the hustle and bustle of life as we knew it, life as it should be. Now, early on, it was useful to slow down. We cooked more, we baked bread, we dug into projects, we learned Zoom. In our congregations, we moved worship and meetings and other groups online, we held fundraisers, we put some projects on hold. But now, 9 months later, when things should be happening again, suddenly nothing is happening. We are still paused. Now what? How will we get back to what we were doing? Will we ever? And more to the point, should we? For many of our congregations, the last service in the building was March 8th. And along with congregations around the world and across denominations, we spent those next few weeks figuring out how to put everything online and just keep going. A lot of things got put on hold after that service on March 8th. But here's the thing. When all of this is over, it will not be March 9th, 2020. We know from pregnancy that a lot happens in 9 months. We know from our news feeds that a lot has happened in these past 9 months too. An acrimonious election cycle, massive wildfires, tragic deaths, protests that were turned violent, personal losses and struggles, and all of the things that in a normal non-pandemic year would feel hard already but feel even more so now. So many things happen at once in our lives, and whether we see it happen or it happens under the surface, a lot of things happen and things change. Whether we're waiting for a baby to be born or a seed to sprout or a vaccine to be released, events are happening. Process theology, which we find both named and unnamed throughout Unitarian Universalist thought, tells us that events, not matter, are the discrete base of reality. Everything from the tiniest quark to the biggest bodies of mass, and thus every thought and action too is in motion. Even when we think we are at rest, every action, every idea, every choice is the universe growing and changing. And that's rather comforting. In a culture that expects us to have goals and objectives and ambitions and to-do lists that we cross off, and that layers on the guilt of unachieved expectations, it's nice to know that something is always moving and growing, even when we are seemingly still, like we feel right now. And while it seems like we have been in the longest Advent season ever, and it's only in its second week, it does matter that we mark it now. Advent becomes even more important because in the midst of this season of more, contrasted with the still pause time of pandemic, Advent asks us to stop, be still, and give thanks. It asks us to be present and wait for the light to return because it will. And it asks us to be present with and for each other. Advent asks us to be a light for one another, to be subject to one another. I know that may seem difficult when there is so much suffering, and so many of us have our own pains, sorrows, and troubles. And it is difficult when we are separated from each other physically, knowing that we're missing the hugs and the handshakes and the singing together and the lighting of candles together. It seems the light is lost in the pausing, in the waiting. Yet we still can be a light for one another in this time of waiting. We can share our own stories of loss, of fear and struggle, our own stories of pain, sorrows, and troubles, and bring comfort and light to those who need it. We may not know how our own darkness can bring light to others, but in this time of waiting for the light to come, we can hear the cries of others who are lost in the darkness, and together find the way out.
Spirit of light, come in. For there is much in our lives closing our eyes to the possible. Pressure mounts with the countdown. So many things to do. The season casts long shadows on regrets and things left undone. The days remind us of our pains and troubles. Grant us patience. Fill us with wonder and anticipation. Fill us with the light of this season.
Oh, come, you wisdom from on high, from depths that hide within our sight. to dwell.
As we have seen, waiting takes on many forms: excitement and anticipation, anxiety and nervousness, action and presence, anger and paralyzing frustration, confidence and dread. Sometimes all of these things all at once. Yet even in this most difficult December, in this time marked by washing hands, wearing masks, staying home, learning and working and worshiping and even socializing online, in this time of pause, Advent reminds us over and over again to stop, be still, give thanks. Advent calls us to seek out and offer hope as best we can, even when hope is hard to find. Advent asks us to be present in the moment, even as we are throwing up our hands in frustration, even as we are making endless lists, even as we are dreading awkward family interactions made more fraught with the illusion of presence, even as we are feeling overwhelmed by the pressures of the season, even as we are dwelling in regrets and inadequacies, even as we anxiously await the new year with its promised vaccines and a shift in policies that affect us all. Even with all of these things, simply being present to the moment, simply being attentive to the darkness, to dwell in the darkness of waiting, of not knowing what is to come, of staying ready and quiet and attentive, to dwell in the darkness of staying silent in the terror of having nothing to say and the greater terror of needing to say nothing, to dwell in the darkness of loving in which it is safe to surrender, to let go of our self-protection and stop holding back, to dwell in the darkness of choosing when to speak and act and change when we cannot know what we have set in motion but still have to take the risk, to dwell in the darkness of hoping in a world that longs for hope, for the wrestling and laboring of all creation, for wholeness and justice and freedom. It is hard, this waiting, because it is open-ended. It's out of our control. Yet when we are present to our waiting and active in our waiting, we can feel that sense of hope that waiting promises, that our pains and sorrows and troubles will ease, that the moral arc of the universe will bend toward justice, that the baby will be born, that the oil in the lamp will last one more night, that the light of the sun will come again. In the waiting, there is hope.
Spirit of hope, come in, for the days darken, and we sometimes wonder if our work is for naught. Wounded souls in a wounded world, we need you. Grant us patience. Fill us with promise and potential. Fill us with joyous anticipation of possibility. Fill us with the hope of this season. Please join us in singing our closing hymn, number 346 in our hymnal, Come Sing a Song with Me.
closing words come from the poet Jan Richardson. This blessing could pound on your door in the middle of the night. This blessing could bang on your window, could tap dance in your hall, could set a dog loose in your room. It could hire a brass band to play outside your house. But what this blessing really wants is not merely your waking, but your company. This blessing wants to sit alongside you and keep vigil with you. This blessing wishes to wait with you. And so though it is capable of causing a cacophony that could raise the dead, this blessing will simply lean toward you and sing quietly in your ear a song to lull you not into sleep, but into waking. It will tell you stories that hold you breathless till the end. It will ask you questions you never considered and have you tell it what you saw in your dreaming. This blessing will do all within its power to entice you into awareness because it wants you to be there, to bear witness, to see the look in your eyes on the day when your vigil is complete and all your waiting has come to its joyous end.